Hello there, and welcome to Umber Dreams Archives. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Take a moment to settle in, to let the day fall away, and to get comfortable wherever you are. Where in the world are you watching from? A quiet bedroom where the lights have dimmed? A cozy corner where you're finally ready to rest? Wherever you are, you're welcome here. Tonight we're going to explore the Challenger Deep, the deepest point in Earth's oceans and one of the most mysterious places in our entire world. We'll descend nearly 7 miles beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean to a place where the pressure is over 1,000 times what we feel at sea level, where sunlight has never reached, and where life exists in ways we're only beginning to understand. It's a journey that takes us to the very bottom of the Mariana Trench, to a landscape as alien and remote as the surface of another planet. But don't worry, this isn't going to be a terrifying descent into crushing darkness. Instead, we'll move slowly and carefully through the science of deep-sea exploration, the remarkable creatures that call this place home, and the handful of humans who have made the journey to Earth's deepest point. By the end, I think you'll find the deep ocean less frightening and more wondrous, a place that reminds us how much beauty exists in the unknown. If you enjoy these calm explorations of our world's mysteries, a like and subscribe really helps reach others seeking the same peaceful way to end their day. And to those already subscribed, thank you for being here. Your presence means more than you know, so settle in, let your shoulders drop. Take a slow breath and feel your body sink into wherever you're resting. Let's begin our slow descent through the deepest darkness on Earth. There's nowhere you need to be right now, nothing you need to do, just listen and let the story unfold. The Challenger. Deep is waiting 7 miles down, and we have all the time in the world to get there. The deepest point in Earth's oceans lies in the western Pacific Ocean, about 200 miles southwest of Guam. It's called Challenger Deep, named after the HMS Challenger, the British survey vessel that first measured the area's extraordinary depth in 1875. The ship lowered weighted ropes into the water and found depths that seemed almost impossible. They measured over 26,000 feet, nearly 5 miles straight down. It was deeper than any mountain was tall, deeper than anyone had imagined the ocean could possibly be. But they were wrong. The ocean was deeper still. Much deeper. Using weighted lines from the surface meant the measurements were rough approximations. The rope would drift in currents. The weight might land on a slope rather than the very bottom. It gave them a sense of scale, but not precision. What the Challenger's crew had discovered was the general location of something extraordinary, but they hadn't yet found the true deepest point. That would take another 75 years and technology that didn't exist in the 19th century. The Mariana Trench itself is a crescent-shaped scar in the ocean floor, stretching for 1,500 miles. It formed where the Pacific Plate is being pushed beneath the smaller Mariana Plate, a process called subduction. As one massive section of Earth's crust slides under another, the grinding, incredible forces create a depression in the seafloor. Over millions of years, this depression has grown deeper and deeper. The trench marks the place where Earth is quite literally swallowing itself, where the surface is being pulled down into the planet's interior, and at the southern end of this trench, at the point where the subduction is steepest and the forces most intense, lies the Challenger Deep. In 1951, using sonar and echo-sounding technology developed during World War II, scientists confirmed what they'd suspected. The Challenger Deep reached depths of nearly 36,000 feet, almost 7 miles down, a vertical distance greater than the height of Mount Everest. Think about that for a moment. If you could somehow place Everest at the bottom of the Challenger Deep and stand on its summit, you would still be over a mile underwater. The deepest point in the ocean is deeper than the highest mountain is tall. It's a dimension that's difficult for our minds to grasp, a scale that feels almost abstract. But it's real. And it's not empty, which leads us gently to the question of what could possibly survive down there, in a place more extreme than anywhere else on Earth's surface. To understand the Challenger Deep, we need to understand pressure. At sea level, the weight of Earth's atmosphere presses down on us at about 14.7 pounds per square inch. We don't notice it because we've evolved in it, because our bodies are built for it. It's simply the weight of all the air above us, from the surface to the edge of space. But water is much heavier than air. Much, much heavier. For every 33 feet you descend into the ocean, the pressure increases by another 14.7 pounds per square inch. By the time you've gone down just 33 feet, you're experiencing twice the pressure you feel at the surface. At 66 feet, 3 times. At 99 feet, 4 times. Recreational scuba divers typically don't go deeper than about 130 feet, where the pressure is already 5 times what we experience in air. At that depth, nitrogen begins to have narcotic effects. Your thinking slows, your judgment becomes impaired. The deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes. Professional technical divers, using special gas mixtures and careful decompression procedures, might reach depths of 1,000 feet. That's remarkable. That's pushing the absolute limits of what human physiology can withstand, even with technology helping us. The Challenger Deep is 36,000 feet down. At that depth, the pressure is approximately 16,000 pounds per square inch. That's over 1,000 times the pressure we experience at sea level. It's roughly equivalent to having 3 SUVs stacked on top of every square inch of your body. Or to think of it another way, if you could somehow place a grand piano on your thumbnail. That's the pressure pressing on every thumbnail-sized bit of surface at the bottom of the Challenger Deep. This pressure would crush a human body instantly. The air in your lungs would compress to nothing. Your bones would shatter. Any hollow space in your body would collapse. It would happen faster than you could perceive it. This is why no human can dive to the Challenger Deep. Why we need machines. Why descending to the bottom requires technology as sophisticated as spacecraft. But here's what's remarkable. Here's what defies our expectations. Life exists at this depth. Creatures live and hunt and reproduce in pressure that would obliterate us. They've adapted to conditions we can barely imagine, and they thrive there. The deep isn't empty. It's not a dead zone. It's home. The pressure that seems so impossibly hostile to us is simply normal to them. Their bodies are built differently. They have no air spaces to collapse. Their proteins and cellular structures are adapted to function under extreme compression. Some even require the pressure to survive. Take them to the surface too quickly, and they die, not from the pressure, but from its absence. The deep is where they belong. And this brings us to something equally remarkable about the Challenger Deep. Not just what the pressure does, but what it means for everything else about this environment. Sunlight penetrates seawater to varying depths depending on water clarity. But even in the clearest tropical waters, it follows predictable physical laws. The ocean absorbs light. Red wavelengths disappear first, filtered out within the first 30 feet. By 100 feet, everything appears blue-green. Colours vanish. By 650 feet, even in perfect conditions, sunlight has faded to less than 1% of surface intensity. This depth, 650 feet, marks the bottom of what oceanographers call the epipelagic zone, the sunlight zone. Below this, we enter the mesopelagic, the twilight zone. Here, in the dim blue glow, the last traces of sunlight create a haunting cathedral-like space. Some light still filters down, but it's faint, ethereal. By the time you reach 3,000 feet, that faint glow is gone. Completely. Absolutely. You've entered the bathypelagic zone, the midnight zone where no sunlight ever reaches. The Challenger Deep lies far, far below even this. At 36,000 feet it rests in a depth zone called the Hadal zone, named after Hades, the ancient Greek underworld. It's a fitting name. This is a realm of eternal darkness, a place where the sun is not just absent but irrelevant. The concept of day and night means nothing here. There are no seasons of light and shadow. There is only darkness, permanent, complete. A darkness so total that if you could somehow survive at this depth with your eyes open, you would see nothing, not shapes, not shadows, nothing. Yet this doesn't mean the deep is utterly lightless. Because life, as it often does, has found a way to create its own illumination. Bioluminescence, the production of light through chemical reactions in living tissue, is extraordinarily common in the deep ocean. Some estimates suggest that up to 90% of deep-sea creatures produce their own light in some form. They glow, they flash, they create constellations in the darkness, but the Challenger Deep is different. It lies at the very bottom, in the Hadal zone, where even bioluminescence becomes rare. The creatures here often have no eyes at all, or eyes that have evolved into simple light-detecting organs. Why invest energy in vision when there's almost nothing to see? Why maintain eyes when they serve no purpose? The darkness at the bottom of the Challenger Deep is not the comfortable darkness of a moonless night on Earth. It's not the darkness of a cave where you might eventually adjust and begin to make out shapes. It's a fundamental absence, a place where light has never been and will never be, except for the brief, startling illumination brought by human explorers in their submarines. Imagine it, if you will. 7 miles of water above you, the surface so far away it might as well be another planet. No light, no sound except the distant creaks and groans of the trench itself, the slow movement of water, the occasional call of creatures passing through. The temperature hovering just above freezing, barely warmer than 34 degrees Fahrenheit, and the pressure, always the pressure, bearing down, constant, immense. This is the environment at the bottom of the world. This is what the Challenger Deep offers to anything that would call it home. And yet, despite everything that makes this place seem impossibly hostile, despite the crushing pressure and the eternal cold and the absolute darkness, humans have been there, not many. Only 3 missions have successfully reached the bottom, but we have touched the deepest point on Earth, which brings us naturally to the story of how we got there and what we found when we arrived. On the morning of January 23rd, 1960, 2 men climbed into a steel sphere 7 feet in diameter and began to descend toward the Challenger Deep. Their names were Jacques Piccard, a Swiss oceanographer and engineer, and Don Walsh, a lieutenant in the United States Navy. The vessel they rode in was called the Trieste, a bathyscaphe designed by Jacques' father, Auguste Piccard. It looked like nothing else in the world, a strange hybrid of submarine and balloon, adapted for an environment more hostile than space. The Trieste worked on a beautifully simple principle. The steel sphere where the men sat was strong enough to resist the crushing pressure of the deep. Above this sphere was a large float filled with gasoline. Gasoline is lighter than water and crucially incompressible. Unlike air, which would be crushed to nothing at depth, gasoline maintains its volume regardless of pressure. This made it perfect for providing buoyancy. To descend, the Trieste carried iron pellets as ballast. To rise, they would release the pellets. The bathyscaphe would float gently back to the surface, carried by the gasoline-filled float. The descent began at 8:23 in the morning. They sank slowly, carefully through the layers of the ocean, past the sunlight zone, past the twilight zone, into the midnight zone and beyond. They fell through water for hours, a controlled descent into a place no human had ever been. The only light was from their instruments. The only sound was the creak of metal adjusting to the ever-increasing pressure and their own breathing. At 300 feet they heard a sharp crack. Something had broken. They considered turning back but decided to continue, carefully monitoring every system. The crack, they later discovered, was from a plexiglass viewing port in the exterior structure, not part of the critical pressure sphere. Concerning, but not fatal, they kept descending. By the time they reached 30,000 feet, the pressure on the outer hull was reaching levels no human-made vessel had ever experienced. Every square inch of the Trieste's surface bore the weight of over 7 tons. The steel sphere compressed slightly, shrinking by a measurable amount. Inside, Piccard and Walsh felt their ears pop continuously, As the air pressure in their tiny chamber adjusted, the temperature dropped, condensation formed on the cold metal walls. At 35,800 feet, they touched bottom. The depth gauge showed a number that seemed almost impossible. They had descended nearly 7 miles straight down. Below them was nothing. They had reached the very bottom of the ocean, the lowest point on Earth's solid surface. Picard and Walsh looked out through the tiny, thick porthole and saw, in the beam of their external lights, something they hadn't expected. They saw a fish and a shrimp moving along the sediment, alive. This single observation changed our understanding of the deep ocean. Scientists had debated whether life could exist at such depths. The pressure seemed too great, the conditions too extreme. Some believed the Hadal zone would be barren, a lifeless wasteland of silt and rock. But there it was, life, adapted, thriving. The deep was not empty. Picard and Walsh stayed on the bottom for 20 minutes. They took photographs, they made observations, they experienced something no human beings had experienced before or would experience again for another 52 years. Then they released their ballast. The iron pellets fell away, settling into the sediment. The Trieste, suddenly lighter, began to rise. The ascent took 3 hours and 27 minutes. When they surfaced, they had been gone for nearly 9 hours. They had touched the deepest point on Earth and returned to tell about it. The Trieste's dive proved that the Challenger Deep was reachable, that human engineering could withstand the pressure, that we could, if we chose to, explore the deepest parts of our own planet. But it also revealed how difficult such exploration would be, how expensive, how dangerous. After 1960, it would be more than half a century before anyone returned to the Challenger Deep. And in those 52 years of waiting, we learned to appreciate just how much we didn't know about what lived in that darkness 7 miles down. After Picard and Walsh's historic dive in 1960, the Challenger Deep became a place of imagination more than exploration. Scientists knew it existed. They knew life survived there. But the difficulty and expense of mounting another expedition meant that for decades, the deepest point on Earth remained largely untouched, unvisited. We sent more people to the moon than to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. We orbited Mars. We sent probes to the outer planets. But we didn't go back down. This wasn't because we'd learned everything there was to know. Far from it. Picard and Walsh's 20 minutes on the seafloor had barely scratched the surface of what the Challenger Deep could teach us. They'd seen creatures. They'd observed the landscape. But they hadn't collected samples. They hadn't conducted detailed surveys. Their instruments, while remarkable for 1960, were primitive by modern standards. The photographs they took were grainy, unclear. The scientific data, while valuable, was limited. But mounting an expedition to the Challenger Deep requires extraordinary resources. You need a vessel capable of withstanding pressures that would crush almost anything humans have built. You need a support ship, a crew, weeks or months of planning, specialized equipment. The cost runs into millions of dollars, and the risk is substantial. For most of those 52 years, no government or institution was willing to make that investment. The deep ocean, despite its mysteries, couldn't compete with the excitement and political value of space exploration. So instead of direct exploration, oceanographers studied the Hadal zone indirectly. They dropped cameras attached to weighted lines, letting them fall to the bottom and taking photographs on timers before being hauled back up. They lowered baited traps, waiting hours for them to sit on the seafloor before retrieving them to see what creatures they'd caught. They used remotely operated vehicles, though even these sophisticated robots struggled at such depths. The pressure destroyed electronics. The distances made control difficult. Each mission was a gamble. What they learned, slowly and piecemeal, was remarkable. The Hadal zone, far from being a uniform wasteland, was diverse. Different trenches hosted different communities of life. Creatures found in the Mariana Trench weren't necessarily the same as those in the Tonga Trench or the Philippine Trench. The deep ocean had its own ecosystems, its own unique species, its own patterns of life adapted to specific conditions. The crushing pressure, the eternal darkness, the near-freezing temperature, these weren't just obstacles to life. They were selective forces, shaping evolution in ways we were only beginning to understand. Scientists discovered amphipods, shrimp-like crustaceans, living at depths of over 30,000 feet. They found sea cucumbers and snailfish at extreme depths. They detected evidence of bacterial communities in the sediment, microorganisms that processed the steady rain of organic matter falling from the sunlit waters thousands of feet above. The deep wasn't as densely populated as shallow seas, but it wasn't empty. It was different, quieter, slower, but alive. And yet, without another manned mission, without actually being there, scientists felt something was missing. Cameras and traps could only tell you so much. Remote observations had their limits. There's something about direct human presence, about seeing with your own eyes, that no amount of technology can fully replace. The desire to return to the Challenger deep grew stronger as the years passed and technology improved. By the early 2000s, material science had advanced. Computers were smaller and more powerful. Battery technology had improved. Communications had evolved. Everything that had made the Trieste's dive so challenging in 1960 could now be approached with better tools, better understanding, better engineering. The question wasn't whether we could return to the Challenger deep. The question was who would do it first. The answer came from an unexpected place, not from a government agency or a military program, but from a filmmaker who had spent his career exploring the ocean through movies and who wanted to see the real thing for himself. His name was James Cameron, and in 2012, he would become the third human being to reach the bottom of the Challenger deep, and the first to go there alone. But before we follow him down, let's pause and consider what was waiting there in the darkness, the strange and beautiful forms that life has taken in Earth's deepest place. The organisms that live in the Challenger deep have solved a problem that would kill us instantly. They've adapted to pressure that would crush bone, collapse lungs, and turn a human body into something unrecognizable. But they didn't adapt by becoming harder or stronger in the way we might imagine. They adapted by becoming softer, more flexible, by eliminating the very structures that pressure would destroy. Many deep-sea creatures have no bones at all, no rigid skeletal system, no air-filled swim bladders like the fish we see in shallow waters. Instead, their bodies are composed primarily of water and soft tissues, materials that are already incompressible. You can't crush water. You can apply enormous pressure to it, but its volume doesn't change. A creature made mostly of water experiences the pressure equally inside and out. There's no differential, no crushing force. The pressure simply exists like gravity as a constant environmental condition. Consider the amphipods found in the Hadal zone. These small crustaceans, usually just a few inches long, look somewhat like shrimp. They have segmented bodies and multiple legs. But unlike their shallow water relatives, deep-sea amphipods have bodies that are soft, almost translucent. Their exoskeletons are thin and flexible. They don't fight the pressure, they exist within it. When researchers brought Hadal amphipods to the surface in pressurized containers and then slowly released the pressure, the amphipods died. Not from being crushed, but from the absence of pressure. They had evolved so completely for their environment that they couldn't survive without it. Scientists have discovered that these deep-sea creatures produce special proteins called piezolites. These molecules help stabilize cellular structures under extreme pressure. They counteract the tendency of pressure to deform proteins and disrupt cellular function. It's elegant, really. A molecular-level adaptation that allows life to function in conditions that seem impossible. The cells of a Hadal amphipod aren't fundamentally different from cells in shallow water creatures. They just contain additional mechanisms, additional chemical support systems that maintain function under compression. There's also the matter of metabolism. Life at these depths moves slowly. Food is scarce. The eternal darkness means no photosynthesis, no plants, no algae. Everything that lives in the Challenger Deep depends on what falls from above, the steady drift of dead organisms and organic particles sinking down from the sunlit surface thousands of feet overhead. This rain of food is called marine snow, and it's the foundation of the deep sea food web. But it's sparse, unreliable. You can't waste energy when food might not come again for days or weeks. So creatures in the Hadal zone have evolved low metabolic rates. They move slowly, they grow slowly, they reproduce slowly. A deep-sea amphipod might live for years, even decades, growing gradually, conserving energy. Time operates differently down there. There's no urgency, no seasons driving breeding cycles, just the long, slow continuity of existence in the dark. And yet, despite the apparent scarcity, life has diversified. Different species occupy different niches. Some feed on the sediment, processing organic matter mixed with mud. Some are scavengers, detecting the chemical signature of a dead fish or whale fall and navigating through the darkness to feed on it. Some are predators, hunting other deep-sea creatures using senses we're only beginning to understand. They detect chemical signals, vibrations, pressure waves. In the absence of light, they've developed other ways to perceive their world. The creatures of the Challenger Deep teach us something profound about life itself. They show us that life is not fragile in the way we often assume. It's not limited to comfortable, moderate conditions. Life is adaptable, resilient. Given time and selection pressure, it finds ways to exist in environments that seem utterly hostile. The deep ocean is one of the most extreme environments on Earth, and yet it's thriving with organisms that have not only survived but flourished there. They don't see their home as hostile. To them, it's simply home, the only place they've ever known, the only place they could exist. And this connects to something equally important, something worth exploring as we continue our descent through this story. Not just what lives in the deep, but how we've come to understand these creatures and what they're teaching us about the limits and possibilities of life on Earth. In the sunlit surface waters of the ocean, vision is crucial. Fish have elaborate eyes. Squid have eyes as complex as mammalian eyes. Sight helps them hunt, avoid predators, find mates, navigate their world. But as you descend deeper, as the light fades, the importance of vision changes. By the time you reach the midnight zone 3,000 feet down, bioluminescence becomes the primary source of light. Creatures produce their own glow, flashing patterns to communicate, to attract prey, to startle predators. Eyes remain useful, but they're detecting different things. Not sunlight reflecting off objects, but the living light produced by other organisms. In the Challenger Deep, even bioluminescence becomes rare. The energy cost of producing light is too high for most creatures living in such a food-scarce environment. Why waste precious calories on light when almost nothing around you can see it? So vision, that sense we rely on so completely, becomes increasingly irrelevant as you go deeper into the Hadal zone. Evolution, always efficient, begins to reduce or eliminate structures that no longer serve a purpose. Some Hadal fish have eyes that are vestigial, reduced to tiny spots of light-sensitive cells. They can detect the presence or absence of light, but they can't form images. They can't see shapes or details. Other creatures have no eyes at all, just smooth surfaces where eyes would be in their shallow water relatives. The genes for eye development are still there in their DNA, but they're no longer expressed, no longer activated during development. The eyes simply don't form. This is one of the clearest examples of convergent evolution in the deep sea. Different species, from different lineages, independently evolving toward eyelessness. The snailfish found in Hadal zones have minimal eyes. The amphipods have simple eye spots. The sea cucumbers crawling across the sediment have no visual organs whatsoever. They navigate their world through touch, through chemical sensing, through detecting vibrations and pressure changes in the water. They've traded sight for other senses that serve them better in perpetual darkness. But there's something beautiful in this loss. These creatures aren't disabled or disadvantaged. They're perfectly adapted to their environment. Their lack of eyes isn't a deficit, it's an optimization. They've allocated their biological resources to the senses that matter in the deep. Their bodies are covered in chemoreceptors, cells that detect minute concentrations of chemicals in the water. They can smell, in a sense, though they have no noses. They can taste the water around them, sensing the presence of food or predators or potential mates from remarkable distances. Some deep-sea creatures have lateral line systems far more sensitive than those of surface fish. These are organs that detect pressure waves and water movements, allowing the creature to sense objects and other organisms nearby without seeing or touching them. It's almost like sonar, but passive. They feel the disturbance in the water created by movement. In the stillness of the deep, where currents are gentle and water movement is minimal, even small disturbances become detectable. There are also creatures that use mechanoreceptors, sensors that detect physical contact and vibration. The long, delicate antennae of deep-sea amphipods aren't just for touch. They're incredibly sensitive instruments that can detect the faintest vibrations, the slightest movement of water molecules. In the silence of the Hadal zone, these senses give them a detailed map of their immediate surroundings, perhaps richer and more useful than vision ever could be in complete darkness. What we're seeing in the Challenger Deep is not the absence of sensory experience, but its transformation. These creatures experience their world differently than we do, but no less completely. They live in a landscape of chemical gradients and pressure waves and tactile sensations. They navigate, they hunt, they avoid danger, they find mates. They do everything necessary for survival, just without the sense we consider most essential. It's a reminder that our perception of the world isn't the only way to perceive it, that different environments favour different senses, that life finds the tools it needs for wherever it exists, and this principle, this idea that adaptation shapes perception and survival, extends beyond just vision. It applies to every aspect of how Hadal creatures live, including something we haven't yet discussed in detail, but which is perhaps the most remarkable adaptation of all: how they deal with the constant crushing pressure itself. The submersible was called Deepsea Challenger. It looked nothing like the Trieste. Where Picard and Walsh's bathyscarf had been large and ungainly, the Deepsea Challenger was sleek and vertical, a lime green torpedo designed to descend pilot first. James Cameron sat in a sphere 43 inches in diameter, smaller than the Trieste's pressure chamber, barely large enough to curl into a seated position. The sphere was made of syntactic foam embedded with glass microspheres, a material that could withstand enormous pressure while remaining buoyant. It was revolutionary engineering, funded largely by Cameron himself after years of planning. The dive began early in the morning, local time. From a spot in the Western Pacific carefully chosen to be directly over the Challenger Deep. Cameron had trained for this moment for years. He'd made countless dives in submersibles. He understood the risks. He knew that if something went wrong at depth, there would be no rescue. The Deepsea Challenger would either return to the surface on its own, or it wouldn't return at all. The ocean at 36,000 feet offers no margin for error, no second chances. The descent took 2 hours and 36 minutes. Cameron fell through the water column, watching the light fade through a small viewport only inches in diameter. Blue became dark blue became black. The temperature inside the sphere dropped as the cold of the deep seeped through the insulated walls. He could hear the structure of the submersible creaking and groaning, adjusting to the increasing pressure. Small sounds, but concerning in the absolute silence of descent. Every noise made him wonder if something was failing, if a seal was about to rupture, if the sphere would suddenly implode. But the Deepsea Challenger held. The engineering was sound. At 35,756 feet, the submersible touched the sediment of the Challenger Deep. The collision with the bottom was gentle, almost imperceptible. Cameron engaged the thrusters to stabilize his position and looked out through the viewport at landscape no one had seen with their own eyes in 52 years. He saw a pale, flat plain of sediment stretching away in all directions. The seafloor wasn't perfectly flat but gently undulating, marked by small ridges and depressions. It looked almost lunar, barren and quiet. His powerful lights, the brightest ever brought to this depth, illuminated the area in harsh white light. Tiny particles of marine snow drifted slowly downward through the water, visible in the beams like dust in sunlight. There was no current, no movement except the slow settling of organic matter. Cameron spent approximately 3 hours on the bottom. He collected samples of sediment. He filmed the landscape in high definition, capturing images that would later be analysed by scientists. He manoeuvred the submersible carefully, exploring as much area as he could within the limitations of his life support and battery power. He saw small amphipods moving through the sediment. He observed bacterial mats. He documented everything with the methodical attention of someone who knew this opportunity might never come again. But he also experienced something that couldn't be captured on film: the profound solitude of being the only human being 7 miles beneath the ocean's surface. The awareness that above him was a column of water so tall it could swallow mountains, that the pressure outside his tiny sphere was sufficient to crush him to nothing in a fraction of a second, that he was, in that moment, more isolated from other human beings than any person in orbit around Earth. Astronauts on the International Space Station are only 250 miles from the planet's surface. Cameron was 7 miles away, but those miles were vertical, through an environment that wouldn't just kill him, but obliterate him. After 3 hours and 16 minutes on the bottom, he released the ballast weights. The ascent began. The Deepsea Challenger rose smoothly, quickly, pulled upward by its buoyancy. The trip to the surface took 69 minutes. When Cameron emerged from the hatch after nearly 7 hours sealed inside, he was physically exhausted but mentally exhilarated. He had done it. He had returned to the Challenger deep. And more importantly, he had proven that modern technology could make such dives safer, more practical, more repeatable. The age of Hadal exploration, after 52 years of waiting, had finally begun again. And with it came new questions about what else might be living in the deepest darkness. The high-definition footage James Cameron brought back from the Challenger Deep revealed a world that was both familiar and utterly alien. The seafloor looked, in some ways, like deserts on land. Flat expanses of fine sediment, small mounds and depressions, occasional rocks. But the scale was different. The absolute stillness was different. Nothing moved except the tiny creatures the lights revealed, and even they moved slowly, conserving energy in their food-scarce environment. The most common visible organisms were amphipods, those shrimp-like crustaceans that seem to thrive in Hadal zones worldwide. They appeared in the footage as small, pale shapes moving across the sediment or swimming in short bursts through the water column. Some were translucent, almost ghostly. Others were opaque white or pale pink. They ranged in size from less than an inch to several inches long. The cameras captured them feeding, moving, existing in an environment that would kill most life on Earth. Scientists analysing the footage noticed something interesting about their behaviour. The amphipods didn't seem to move randomly. They appeared to be searching, following chemical trails in the water that led them toward food sources. When Cameron deployed bait, a dead fish attached to a sample collection arm, amphipods appeared within minutes. Dozens of them, then hundreds. They swarmed over the bait, feeding voraciously. In the deep ocean, where food is scarce, any carcass becomes a temporary oasis, attracting scavengers from surprising distances. But the footage also revealed how sparse life was at this depth. Between the small concentrations of amphipods, large areas of seafloor appeared completely barren. No fish, no crustaceans, no visible organisms at all, just sediment stretching away into the darkness beyond the light's reach. This wasn't the teeming abundance of a coral reef or kelp forest. This was life at the edge of possibility, organisms eking out existence with minimal resources. The deep was alive, but only just. Cameron's cameras also documented the sediment itself, and this proved scientifically valuable. The Hadal sediment is a mixture of clay, silt, and organic material that has drifted down from the surface over thousands or millions of years. It's not uniform. Different areas have different compositions depending on what's falling from above. Some areas are primarily clay, fine particles that settle slowly and evenly. Others have higher concentrations of organic matter, the remains of organisms from the sunlit zones. Still others contain shells and skeletal fragments, the harder parts that don't decompose as quickly. Within this sediment live bacteria, vast communities of microorganisms processing the organic matter, breaking it down, recycling nutrients. These bacterial communities are invisible to cameras, but scientists can sample the sediment and culture the bacteria in laboratories. What they've found is remarkable diversity. Bacteria adapted to extreme pressure. Bacteria that can survive in near-freezing temperatures. Bacteria that metabolize compounds we didn't know could be metabolized. The sediment of the Challenger Deep isn't dead. It's a living ecosystem, just one that operates on a microscale we can't see without magnification. The footage also revealed geological features. The Challenger Deep isn't perfectly flat. There are small scarps and ridges, areas where the sediment has shifted or where underlying rock protrudes through. These features create microhabitats, small areas where conditions differ slightly from the surrounding seafloor. A ridge might create a barrier that traps sediment on one side, creating a deeper, softer area. A rocky outcrop might provide a surface for sessile organisms to attach to. Even in this seemingly uniform environment, there's variation, complexity, different niches for different organisms. What the footage couldn't show, of course, was sound. Cameron's microphones picked up some vibrations and low-frequency sounds, but the Challenger Deep is essentially silent. No whale songs penetrate this far down, no breaking waves, no crackling of snapping shrimp like you hear in shallow tropical waters, just the deep, slow sounds of the planet itself, the creaking of the trench as tectonic plates move. The distant rumble of earthquakes propagating through the water, sounds that exist at frequencies and volumes we would struggle to perceive. Analysing all this data, processing the footage, examining the samples, scientists began to develop a more complete picture of what the Challenger Deep actually was. Not an endpoint or a dead zone, but a functioning ecosystem. Sparse, slow, extreme, but alive, and connected through the constant rain of organic matter to the sunlit surface miles above. The deep depends on the shallow. The Hadal zone exists in relationship with the rest of the ocean, not separate from it. And this understanding leads us to consider the historical context, the decades between the first and second manned visits to the deepest point on Earth. Between 1960 and 2012, the Challenger Deep existed in human consciousness as more myth than reality. People knew it was there. Oceanographers could point to it on maps. But for most of those 52 years, it remained unvisited, unexplored except by remote cameras and occasional unmanned vehicles. It became one of those facts children learned in school. The deepest point in the ocean is almost 7 miles down in the Mariana Trench. But few understood what that really meant. Fewer still considered what might be living there. During these decades, ocean science made remarkable progress in other areas. Researchers mapped hydrothermal vents and discovered entire ecosystems thriving on chemicals rather than sunlight. They documented the mid-ocean ridges where new seafloor forms. They studied whale migration patterns and tracked ocean currents. They monitored the health of coral reefs and investigated the impact of warming waters. The ocean revealed secrets about itself constantly, but the Hadal zone remained largely mysterious. Not because scientists weren't interested, but because getting there was so difficult. The technology that existed in the 1960s and 70s wasn't sophisticated enough for detailed Hadal exploration. Submersibles could reach depths of a few thousand feet, occasionally 10 or 12,000, but 36,000 feet remained out of reach for anything except specialised vessels like the Trieste. And building another Trieste, or something better, required funding that wasn't available. Governments were more interested in military applications or space exploration. Private industry had no economic incentive to explore the deepest ocean. There were no resources to extract, no commercial fishing opportunities. The Hadal zone offered scientific knowledge but not profit. So the deep remained largely untouched. And our understanding of it came from indirect methods. Researchers dropped weighted cameras to the seafloor on cables, letting them take photographs on timers before hauling them back up. These images were grainy and limited to whatever happened to be within the camera's frame when it reached bottom. Sometimes they captured amphipods or fish, sometimes just sediment. The method was hit or miss, and the images raised more questions than they answered. Baited traps provided another source of information. Scientists would lower traps containing bait, dead fish or other organic matter, and leave them on the seafloor for hours or days. When retrieved, the traps often contained amphipods and other scavengers that had been attracted to the bait. These specimens could be studied, classified, dissected. Their tissues could be analysed to understand their biochemistry, but traps only caught what was attracted to bait. They missed organisms that weren't scavengers, that didn't hunt by smell, that lived in the sediment or moved through different areas. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, remotely operated vehicles had become more sophisticated. ROVs, controlled from ships on the surface via tethers, could descend to considerable depths and operate with more flexibility than simple cameras. They had arms that could collect samples. They could maneuver and explore. But even the most advanced ROVs struggled at Hadal depths. The pressure was simply too great for most electronics. The tethers had to be incredibly long, and managing 36,000 feet of cable from a ship on the surface was technically challenging and expensive. What all these indirect methods revealed was that the Hadal zone was not uniform. Different trenches had different communities. The Mariana Trench was not the same as the Tonga Trench or the Kermadec Trench. Even within the Mariana Trench, different areas hosted different species. The Hadal zone was proving to be more diverse, more complex, more interesting than anyone had expected. But without actually going there, without direct observation, scientists felt they were missing something fundamental. There were debates in the oceanographic community about whether manned exploration was necessary. Some argued that ROVs could do everything humans could do, and do it more safely and cheaply. Others contended that direct human presence brought value that technology couldn't replicate. The ability to make instant decisions, to notice unexpected details, to experience the environment and understand it in a way that cameras and sensors couldn't fully capture. These debates continued throughout the silent decades, even as the technology for safe deep-sea exploration slowly improved. By the early 2000s, materials science had advanced to the point where building a new manned submersible capable of reaching the Challenger deep was feasible. The question was no longer whether we could do it, but who would fund it and who would be brave enough to make the dive. The answer, as we've seen, was James Cameron, and his successful descent in 2012 opened a new era of Hadal exploration, leading us to discoveries that continue to reshape our understanding of life in Earth's deepest places. What James Cameron experienced during his 3 hours at the bottom of the Challenger Deep was something very few people will ever know: complete isolation in the most remote place on Earth. The pressure sphere was so small he couldn't fully extend his legs. The temperature inside dropped to near freezing. The only sounds were the hum of life support systems and his own breathing. Outside the tiny viewport, the powerful lights illuminated a landscape that looked like it belonged on another planet. Cameron had spent years preparing for this dive, but nothing could fully prepare him for the psychological experience of being 7 miles beneath the ocean's surface. He was deeper than commercial aircraft fly high. If something went wrong, there would be no rescue. The surface was over 2 hours away. even if the ascent went perfectly. He was more alone than astronauts in orbit, more isolated than anyone at a polar research station. The weight of the ocean above him was almost incomprehensible, and yet the engineering of the Deepsea Challenger kept him safe inside a bubble of air pressure identical to what he'd experienced at sea level. The isolation brought clarity. Cameron later described a sense of intense focus, a narrowing of awareness to the immediate task of documenting what he saw. He operated the submersible's cameras and sampling arms with practiced precision. He made observations. He narrated what he saw for the audio recordings. But he also allowed himself moments of simply looking, of taking in the strangeness of this alien landscape, the pale sediment, the slow-moving amphipods, the absolute stillness of water that had been still for perhaps thousands of years. There was beauty in it, though not the kind we usually associate with the ocean. No colourful fish, no waving seagrass, no sunlight filtering through clear water. Instead, a stark, minimalist beauty. The purity of sediment unmarked by anything except the tracks of tiny creatures. The precision of the amphipods' movements as they navigated their dark world. The way marine snow drifted down through the light's beams. A constant gentle reminder that the deep is connected to the surface, that what happens in sunlit waters eventually settles here. Cameron collected sediment samples, carefully manoeuvring the submersible's robotic arm to scoop material into collection chambers. These samples would later be analysed for their bacterial content, their chemical composition, their geological history. He also attempted to capture some of the amphipods, but they proved elusive, darting away when the sampling equipment approached. Their movements were quick despite their slow metabolism, evidence that they could respond to threats when necessary. They hadn't survived in this environment by being easy prey. The 3 hours passed both quickly and slowly. Quickly because there was so much to observe, so many tasks to complete. Slowly because every moment felt significant, weighted with the knowledge that he might never return here. This might be his only chance to see the Challenger, deep with his own eyes. The scientific instruments could measure and record, but Cameron wanted to experience it directly, to connect with this place in a way that went beyond data collection. When it was time to ascend, Cameron reported feeling reluctant to leave. The Challenger deep had exceeded his expectations. It wasn't the barren wasteland some had predicted. It was a subtle, quiet ecosystem, functioning according to its own rhythms. Life had found a way to exist here, just as it had found ways to exist in volcanic vents, in Antarctic ice, in desert soils. The deep wasn't empty, it was simply different. Operating on scales of time and energy that didn't match our surface-dwelling expectations. The ascent was faster than the descent, the Deepsea Challenger rising quickly through the water column once the ballast was released. Cameron watched through the viewport as the absolute blackness gradually, imperceptibly began to lighten. Not enough to see by, not enough to notice unless you were watching for it. But eventually, after thousands of feet, the faintest suggestion of blue appeared. Then it grew stronger. The twilight zone. Then actual twilight, dim but real. And finally, brilliantly after hours of darkness, sunlight. The submersible broke the surface in late afternoon, and Cameron emerged to a world that felt almost overwhelming in its brightness and warmth. But he brought with him something valuable. Proof that we could return to the Challenger Deep whenever we chose, that the technology existed, that the deepest ocean was no longer completely beyond our reach, and this proof would inspire others to follow, to build new submersibles, to plan new expeditions. The era of Hadal exploration had truly begun, which brings us to consider what modern technology has revealed about the deep since Cameron's dive. Modern Hadal exploration relies on materials and engineering that would have seemed like science fiction in 1960. The pressure spheres that protect human occupants are made from titanium alloys, or specialized syntactic foams, materials that maintain their structural integrity under pressures that would destroy steel. The viewports are thick pieces of acrylic or sapphire crystal, shaped and polished to distribute pressure evenly. Every seal, every joint, every electrical penetration through the hull is a potential failure point, designed and tested with extreme care. The batteries that power deep-sea submersibles must function in near-freezing temperatures and under enormous pressure. Traditional battery chemistries don't work well in these conditions. The cold slows chemical reactions. The pressure can deform battery casings. Engineers have developed specialized battery designs, sometimes housed in oil-filled compartments that equalize pressure, preventing the batteries from being crushed. These power systems need to provide enough energy for lights, cameras, life support, and propulsion for hours of operation, all while remaining compact and light enough not to compromise the submersible's buoyancy. Communication from the deep ocean floor is another challenge. Radio waves don't penetrate seawater effectively. The submersibles can send acoustic signals, sound waves that travel through water, but the data rate is extremely low. A few words per minute, basic status updates. There's no real-time video transmission from 36,000 feet down. Everything is recorded on board and brought back to the surface for analysis. This means the pilot is operating largely independently, making decisions without immediate input from the surface team. It requires training, experience, and the ability to troubleshoot problems alone. The propulsion systems on modern submersibles are electric thrusters, similar to those used on spacecraft. They allow precise maneuvering in 3 dimensions, essential when working near the seafloor where stirring up sediment can reduce visibility to 0. The thrusters must be powerful enough to overcome gentle currents and maintain position, but not so powerful they disturb the very environment being studied. It's a delicate balance, requiring sophisticated control systems and careful pilot input. Navigation at depth is done primarily through inertial guidance systems and acoustic beacons. GPS doesn't work underwater, so once a submersible descends, it navigates by tracking its movements from a known starting point. Surface ships deploy acoustic transponders, devices that emit sound at specific frequencies. The submersible can ping these transponders and calculate its position based on the time it takes for the sound to return. It's similar to triangulation, but using sound instead of radio signals. Even with these systems, there's always some uncertainty about exact position. The ocean is vast, and 36,000 feet down, being off by even 100 yards means you might be in an entirely different area. The life support systems maintain breathable air, remove carbon dioxide, and regulate temperature inside the pressure sphere. These systems must be completely reliable. There's no opening a window for fresh air at depth. The air inside is continuously recycled through scrubbers that remove CO2 and add fresh oxygen from pressurized tanks. The temperature is controlled through insulation and small heating elements, because the cold of the deep seeps through even the best insulation. Pilots wear warm clothing during dives, despite being sealed inside what amounts to a high-tech bubble. All of this technology serves one purpose: to place a human being safely in an environment that would otherwise kill them instantly. The Challenger, deep is not a place humans can survive naturally. We didn't evolve for it. We have no adaptations for extreme pressure or eternal darkness. But we have intelligence, the ability to build tools, to engineer solutions to problems that would otherwise be insurmountable. And this ability has allowed us to visit the deepest ocean, to observe it directly, to begin understanding it on its own terms. Since Cameron's dive, several other deep-sea vehicles have reached Hadal depths. Victor Vescovo, an explorer and retired naval officer, has made multiple dives to the Challenger Deep in his submersible The Limiting Factor. Each dive adds to our knowledge. Each mission brings back samples, footage, data. The technology continues to improve. Submersibles are becoming more capable, more reliable. The cost is slowly decreasing. What was once a once-in-a-generation achievement is becoming, if not routine, at least repeatable. And with each dive, with each new deployment of cameras and sensors, we're discovering creatures and processes that challenge our understanding of what life can tolerate, what forms it can take in the most extreme environment on Earth's surface. Let's explore some of those discoveries. In the Mariana Trench, at depths of 26,000 feet and deeper, scientists have discovered fish that shouldn't exist according to our previous understanding of biological limits. These fish are snailfish, members of the family Liparidae, and they look like nothing you'd expect to find in the ocean's deepest zones. They're small, usually less than a foot long. Their bodies are translucent, almost gelatinous. They have no scales. Their bones are thin and fragile. They look delicate, almost fragile, and yet they thrive at depths where the pressure exceeds 7,000 pounds per square inch. The Hadal snailfish represent the deepest living fish ever discovered. They've been documented at depths exceeding 27,000 feet, well into the Hadal zone. For years, scientists believed that fish couldn't exist below about 27,000 feet because of a compound called trimethylamine oxide, or TMAO. This organic compound helps stabilize proteins under pressure, and fish use it extensively in their cellular biochemistry. But TMAO concentration has limits. Above certain pressures, fish simply can't produce enough TMAO to keep their proteins functional. The pressure overwhelms their biochemistry. Yet Hadal snailfish exist right at this theoretical limit. They've evolved to maximize TMAO production. Their bodies are essentially optimized pressure resistance machines. Everything about them is adapted for this one purpose, surviving where other fish cannot. They have minimal bone structure because bones are rigid and can crack under extreme pressure. Their flesh is mostly water and soft tissue, incompressible materials. Their skulls are incomplete, with gaps and openings that allow pressure to equalize throughout their bodies. They are, in a sense, living proof that life pushes against limits we thought were absolute. But snailfish aren't the only surprises in the Hadal zone. Sea cucumbers, those slow-moving invertebrates that resemble their vegetable namesakes, have been found at extreme depth throughout various trenches. They crawl across the sediment on tiny tube feet, processing the mud and organic material, extracting whatever nutrition they can. Some species are pale pink or white, others are transparent. They move so slowly that time-lapse photography is needed to observe their movement clearly. In real time, they appear almost stationary. There are also worms, polychaete worms living in the sediment, their bodies barely visible without magnification. These worms process sediment much like earthworms process soil, tunneling through it, breaking down organic matter, creating channels that allow water and oxygen to penetrate deeper into the sediment layers. They're foundational to the Hadal ecosystem, though they're rarely seen because they live within the mud itself, not on its surface. Their presence is detected by the burrows they leave behind, the small holes and tunnels visible in sediment samples. Scientists have discovered that many Hadal organisms are endemic to specific trenches. A species found in the Mariana Trench might not exist in the Tonga Trench or the Kermadec Trench, even though the environmental conditions are similar. This suggests that Hadal zones are isolated from each other, that creatures living at extreme depth can't easily move between trenches. The shallower waters between trenches act as barriers. An amphipod adapted to 30,000-foot depths can't survive at 10,000 feet. The pressure is too low, so populations in different trenches evolve separately, developing unique characteristics over time. Each trench becomes its own evolutionary laboratory. This isolation has implications for biodiversity. If each Hadal zone hosts unique species, then there's far more diversity in the deep ocean than we previously thought. We're not looking at one uniform deep-sea community, but multiple distinct communities, each with its own collection of organisms adapted to specific conditions. Protecting Hadal ecosystems means protecting not just one environment, but multiple unique environments scattered across the ocean floor in different trenches worldwide. The discoveries continue. Each expedition brings back species never seen before. Each sample of sediment reveals new bacteria. The Hadal zone is not fully explored, not even close. We've visited the Challenger deep perhaps a dozen times with manned submersibles and a few hundred times with unmanned vehicles. But the Mariana Trench is 1,500 miles long. The Challenger Deep itself extends over a considerable area. Most of it has never been directly observed. Most of the sediment has never been sampled. There are almost certainly species we haven't discovered yet, organisms living in areas we haven't visited. And this connects to another aspect of the deep ocean that we're only beginning to understand: the geological activity happening at these depths, the forces that created the trenches in the first place. The Mariana Trench exists because of plate tectonics, the slow movement of Earth's crustal plates across the planet's surface. The Pacific Plate, one of the largest tectonic plates on Earth, is moving westward at about 3 inches per year. That's about the speed your fingernails grow. Slow by human standards, geologically it's rapid. And where this plate meets the smaller Mariana Plate, something remarkable happens. The Pacific Plate, being older and denser, slides beneath the Mariana Plate in a process called subduction. The edge of the plate descends into the Earth's mantle, pulled down by its own weight, and where it descends it creates a depression in the seafloor, a trench. This process has been happening for millions of years. The subduction zone that created the Mariana Trench has been active for perhaps 50 million years, maybe longer. During all that time, the Pacific Plate has been steadily, relentlessly sliding beneath the Mariana Plate, descending into the hot interior of the planet. Eventually, the descending plate will melt, becoming part of the mantle again. The rock that was once seafloor will be recycled, transformed, and perhaps millions of years in the future, it will emerge again as volcanic rock somewhere else. Earth consumes and recreates itself constantly, endlessly cycling material through its interior. The subduction process isn't smooth. The plates don't slide past each other easily. They stick. Pressure builds. Eventually the stress becomes too great and the plates slip suddenly, releasing energy. We call this an earthquake. The Mariana Trench region experiences frequent seismic activity. Some earthquakes are minor, barely detectable. Others are significant, releasing energy equivalent to millions of tons of explosives. These earthquakes originate deep beneath the seafloor, sometimes hundreds of miles below the trench itself, as the descending plate continues its journey into the mantle. When a major earthquake occurs near a trench, it can displace enormous volumes of water, creating tsunamis. The waves radiate outward at speeds of 500 miles per hour, crossing entire ocean basins. In deep water, tsunamis are barely noticeable, perhaps a foot or two in height, but travelling at immense speed. But when they reach shallow coastal areas, the waves slow and build, sometimes reaching heights of 30, 50 or even 100 feet. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami and the 2011 Japanese tsunami both originated at subduction zones, where oceanic plates were descending beneath other plates. The Mariana Trench could potentially generate similar events, though its location means any tsunami would primarily affect Pacific Island nations rather than heavily populated coastlines. The geological activity in and around the Mariana Trench creates a dynamic environment. The seafloor isn't static, it's constantly changing, though on timescales we struggle to perceive. Sediment accumulates, landslides occur on the trench walls, sending material tumbling down into the depths. Volcanic activity, driven by the melting of the descending plate, creates new mountains on the ocean floor. The region is alive, geologically speaking, active, dangerous in some ways, but also creative. New seafloor is being formed, old seafloor is being destroyed, the cycle continues. Near trenches there are often volcanic arcs, chains of underwater volcanoes formed by magma rising from the melting descending plate. The Mariana Islands themselves are part of this volcanic arc. They're the visible peaks of massive volcanoes rising from the seafloor. Most of the volcanic arc is underwater, forming mountains and ridges that rise thousands of feet from the abyssal plain but still don't reach the surface. These underwater volcanoes sometimes host hydrothermal vents, openings in the seafloor where superheated water rich in minerals erupts into the cold ocean. Vent communities are among the most remarkable ecosystems on Earth, supporting life through chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis. Bacteria use the chemical energy in the vent fluids to produce organic compounds, forming the base of a food web that includes tube worms, clams, and specialized fish. Though the Challenger Deep itself is too deep and too far from the volcanic arc to host active vents, there are vent systems elsewhere in the Mariana Trench region. These create oases of life in the deep ocean, small areas of high biological activity in an otherwise sparse environment. The vents demonstrate yet again that life is resourceful. Where there's energy in any form, life finds a way to use it. Understanding the geology of the Mariana Trench helps us understand why the Challenger Deep exists and why it's the deepest point on Earth. It's not random, it's the result of specific conditions, a particularly old, dense oceanic plate descending at a steep angle. And this geological context connects to something else worth considering about the deep: how sound behaves in this environment. Sound travels differently in the ocean than in air. In air, sound moves at about 767 miles per hour at sea level. In seawater, it travels at about 3,400 miles per hour, more than 4 times faster. This faster speed is due to water's density and incompressibility. Sound waves propagate more efficiently through water than air, which is why whales can communicate across entire ocean basins, their low-frequency calls travelling hundreds or thousands of miles through the deep. But the Challenger Deep is different from most of the ocean. The extreme pressure, the near-freezing temperature, and the trench's shape all affect how sound behaves. Scientists have deployed hydrophones, underwater microphones, in the Mariana Trench to record the acoustic environment. What they've captured is fascinating. The deep is not silent, but it is quiet, much quieter than shallower waters. In shallow coastal waters, the ocean is noisy. Waves crash. Boats pass overhead. Marine life produces constant sound. The clicking of dolphin echolocation, the grunting of fish, the crackling of snapping shrimp. Shallow water is an acoustic environment rich with information. But descend into the Hadal zone, and most of these sounds disappear. No waves penetrate this deep. No ships create noise here. Most fish don't vocalize, and the ones that do live in shallower zones. The sounds that remain are subtle, geological, biological in quiet ways we're only beginning to understand. Hydrophones in the Mariana Trench have recorded the sounds of earthquakes, both near and far. The low-frequency rumbles propagate through the Earth's crust and into the water, detectable as deep vibrations. They've recorded the sounds of landslides on the trench walls, sediment and rock sliding into the depths. These events create sounds like distant thunder, rolling and fading over minutes. They've also detected sounds from baleen whales thousands of miles away, the low-frequency moans and songs carrying across the Pacific and down into the trench. Even at 36,000 feet, the deep ocean is connected to the surface through sound. But there are other sounds, less easily explained. Occasional clicks and pops that might be from unknown biological sources. Brief whistles or pulses that don't match any known marine mammal or fish. These unexplained sounds are tantalizing hints that the Hadal zone might contain organisms we haven't discovered yet, creatures that communicate or navigate using sound in ways we don't understand. The deep ocean is vast and our sampling is minimal. It's entirely possible that there are animals down there producing sounds we've recorded but can't identify. The amphipods and other small creatures of the Hadal zone likely detect sound, though they don't produce it vocally. They sense vibrations through their bodies, through specialized organs that detect pressure waves in the water. In the darkness, sound and vibration might be as important as chemical cues for navigation and communication. A predator approaching creates water movement. Pressure changes that could be detected. A piece of food settling onto the sediment creates vibrations that radiate outward. The Hadal zone might be experienced by its inhabitants as a landscape of subtle sounds and vibrations, a sensory world completely alien to our experience. Scientists have also detected what they call underscore, quote, underscore zero underscore, and other mysterious low-frequency sounds in various parts of the ocean. While most of these have been explained as iceberg calving or other geological events, they remind us how much we don't know about the acoustic environment of the deep ocean. Sound is our best tool for studying the ocean's interior because light doesn't travel far in water, but radio waves don't penetrate at all. Sonar, acoustic mapping, and passive hydrophone listening are how we explore. And what we're learning is that the ocean has an acoustic structure, layers and channels where sound travels differently, creating an environment as complex in its way as the landscape is in ours. The Challenger Deep's acoustic environment is one of the quietest places on Earth, yet it's not silent. It's a place where the planet's geological processes are audible, where distant events echo down through miles of water, where perhaps unknown creatures produce sounds we're only beginning to detect. The deep ocean speaks, but in a voice so quiet, so different from what we're used to, that we're only now learning to listen. And this brings us gently to consider what human activity has brought to these depths, both intentionally through exploration and unintentionally through the consequences of how we live on the surface. When James Cameron descended to the Challenger Deep in the Deepsea Challenger, the submersible's motors, pumps, and mechanical systems created sounds that had likely never been heard in that exact spot before. The whir of electric thrusters, the click of sampling arms operating, the subtle hum of life support systems. These were human sounds, technological sounds, intruding into an environment that had been shaped only by geological and biological forces for millions of years. The intrusion was temporary, just a few hours, but it represented something significant, our ability to reach even the most remote places on Earth. The acoustic impact of deep-sea exploration is something scientists are beginning to study more carefully. In shallower waters, we know that noise pollution from ships, sonar and industrial activity affects marine life. Whales alter their migration routes to avoid noisy areas. Fish exhibit stress behaviours near loud sounds. Even invertebrates show responses to acoustic disturbances. But we don't yet know how noise affects Hadal organisms because we've barely studied them in their natural environment. We don't know if amphipods respond to the sounds of submersibles. We don't know if the deep-sea fish are disturbed by our presence. The creatures of the Hadal zone have evolved in near silence, and suddenly, a few times a year, massive machines descend from above, creating sounds that must seem, in their context, extraordinary. This isn't to say that exploration shouldn't happen. Understanding the deep ocean is valuable scientifically and important for conservation. But it does mean we should be thoughtful about how we explore. Each dive to the Challenger Deep disturbs the environment to some degree. The lights temporarily illuminate areas that have been dark for eons. The thrusters stir sediment that might have been undisturbed for centuries. The sampling arms collect organisms and sediment, creating small changes in the landscape. These impacts are minimal compared to what we do to shallow marine environments, but in a place so isolated and pristine, even small impacts matter. Scientists working on Hadal exploration have developed protocols to minimize disturbance. Submersibles approach the seafloor slowly to avoid creating sediment plumes. Sampling is done carefully, taking only what's needed for research. Lights are used sparingly, turned on only when necessary for photography or sample collection. The goal is to observe and study while changing as little as possible. It's a philosophy similar to what guides Antarctic research or studies of other pristine environments. Take only data, leave only minimal traces. But there's a broader context to our presence in the deep ocean. We're not just visiting with submersibles. We're affecting the Hadal zone in other, less visible ways. The Challenger Deep, despite being 7 miles beneath the ocean's surface, is not isolated from human activity on land and in shallower waters. What we do at the surface eventually reaches the deep, carried by currents, by sinking particles, by the slow circulation of the global ocean. And what reaches the deep stays there, accumulating in the sediment, becoming part of the environment. One of the most concerning discoveries from recent Hadal research is the presence of pollutants at extreme depths: plastic, industrial chemicals, radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing. These materials, products of human activity, have made their way to the deepest point on Earth. They demonstrate that there is no place on the planet so remote that it remains untouched by our presence. The ocean, for all its vastness, is not infinite in its capacity to dilute and disperse what we put into it. Eventually everything sinks, and where does it sink to? The trenches, the Hadal zones, the Challenger Deep. Scientists have found microplastics in sediment samples from the Mariana Trench. Tiny particles of plastic, fragments from larger pieces that have broken down over time, or microbeads from personal care products, or fibres from synthetic clothing. These particles have drifted down through miles of water, settling into the sediment where they'll remain for thousands or millions of years. Some of these particles are ingested by amphipods and other Hadal creatures. The long-term effects are unknown, but the presence of plastic in the deepest ocean is troubling. It suggests that we've altered even the most remote environment on Earth. Not through deliberate action, but through the accumulated impact of billions of people living in ways that produce persistent waste. The sound of our machines in the Challenger Deep is temporary, but the plastic, the chemicals, the evidence of our civilization, that's permanent. And this raises questions about our responsibility to places we've barely begun to explore. Questions that become more pressing as we learn more about what the deep ocean contains. The discovery of plastic in the Mariana Trench represents one of the more disheartening findings in recent oceanographic research. When scientists analysed sediment samples and examined amphipods collected from Hadal depths, they found plastic particles in both, not occasionally, consistently. Studies published in the late 2010s showed that amphipods from the Mariana Trench had ingested plastic fibres and fragments. Their digestive systems contained materials that had no business being there, synthetic polymers that don't break down biologically and that provide no nutritional value. Think about what this means. An amphipod living 7 miles beneath the ocean's surface in the most remote marine environment on Earth is consuming plastic. This amphipod has never been near human civilization. Its ancestors have lived in the Hadal zone for millions of years, adapting to pressure and darkness, evolving to thrive in extreme conditions, and now, in our era, it's ingesting plastic. Materials that didn't exist until the mid-20th century. Materials specifically designed to be durable and resistant to degradation. Materials that are now so ubiquitous in the environment that they've reached the deepest ocean. The pathway is straightforward, though slow. Plastic enters the ocean from countless sources: discarded bottles and bags, fishing gear, industrial waste, microfibers from laundry, microbeads from cosmetics. Some of this plastic floats, accumulating in the infamous garbage patches where currents concentrate it. But much of it sinks, especially as it becomes colonized by marine organisms whose weight pulls it down, or as it fragments into smaller pieces with density high enough to overcome buoyancy. This sinking plastic descends through the water column, drifting lower and lower until it reaches the seafloor. And if it happens to sink above a trench, it continues down into the Hadal zone. The trenches act as collectors, gathering material from the waters above. Once in the deep, plastic doesn't degrade the way organic matter does. There's no sunlight to break chemical bonds through photodegradation. The cold water and high pressure slow any chemical processes. Bacteria in the deep ocean have not evolved to metabolize synthetic polymers, so the plastic persists. It sits in the sediment or drifts near the bottom, available to any creature that mistakes it for food. And in an environment where food is scarce, amphipods and other scavengers aren't choosy. They detect chemical signals that suggest organic matter and consume whatever they find. Sometimes that's actual food, sometimes it's plastic. The effects on individual organisms are not fully understood. In shallow water species, we know that plastic ingestion can cause physical damage, blocking digestive systems and reducing the ability to absorb nutrients. It can also leach chemical additives, compounds added during manufacturing to give plastic certain properties, and these chemicals can disrupt hormones and other biological functions. Whether Hadal amphipods experience similar effects is unknown. We haven't been able to study them long-term in their natural environment. We can collect them and bring them to the surface, but they die in captivity, unable to survive without the extreme pressure they require. So we can observe that they contain plastic, but we can't easily determine what that plastic is doing to them. What we can say is that the presence of plastic in the Challenger Deep is a marker of human impact. It's evidence that our activities have consequences that reach every part of the planet. The plastic in the Mariana Trench didn't get there through any intentional action. No one dumped trash directly into the Challenger Deep, but the cumulative effect of millions of tons of plastic entering the ocean each year means that even the most remote places receive their share. The Hadal zone, which should be pristine, which has been isolated from most surface processes for millions of years, is now contaminated with our waste. This contamination is likely irreversible on any human timescale. The plastic that's already in the Challenger Deep will remain there for thousands or millions of years. We can stop adding more, we can reduce our plastic use and improve waste management, but we can't retrieve what's already there. The deep ocean is too vast, the plastic too dispersed. We've altered the environment permanently, adding a new element to ecosystems that evolved without it. Future paleontologists studying sediment cores from the Mariana Trench will find a distinct layer marking the mid-20th century onward, a layer containing plastic and other synthetic materials. They'll call it the Anthropocene, the age of human impact on Earth's geology, and the Challenger Deep will be part of that record. But there are other pollutants in the deep as well, some even more concerning than plastic because of their chemical toxicity. Beyond plastic, the Challenger Deep contains chemical pollutants that have accumulated over decades. One of the most concerning groups of chemicals found in Hadal amphipods are persistent organic pollutants, or POPS. These are synthetic chemicals that resist degradation and accumulate in living tissues. They include compounds like polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, once widely used in electrical equipment and industrial processes, and polybrominated diphenyl ethers, or PBDEs, used as flame retardants. Both have been banned or restricted in many countries because of their toxicity, but they persist in the environment for decades after they're released. Studies analysing the tissue of amphipods from the Mariana Trench have found concentrations of POPs that exceed levels found in some heavily polluted coastal areas. This is counterintuitive. How could creatures living in the most remote part of the ocean contain more pollutants than creatures living near industrial zones? The answer lies in a process called bioaccumulation and the unique characteristics of Hadal ecosystems. POPS are lipophilic, meaning they dissolve in fats rather than water. When marine organisms consume these chemicals, they tend to store them in fatty tissues rather than excrete them, and when predators eat those organisms, they accumulate the chemicals from all their prey. The concentration increases at each level of the food web. In the Hadal zone, where food is scarce and creatures live for long periods, bioaccumulation is particularly effective. An amphipod might live for decades, slowly accumulating POPs from everything it consumes. The sediment it processes contains trace amounts of these chemicals. The organic matter falling from above contains them. Over years, the concentration builds. When that amphipod is eaten by a larger predator, the POPs transfer to the predator's tissues. And because Hadal creatures have slow metabolisms and long lifespans, they have plenty of time to accumulate high concentrations. The POPs in the Mariana Trench originated mostly from industrial activity in the 1970s and 1980s, before regulations limited their use. They entered the ocean through runoff, atmospheric deposition, and direct discharge. Once in the water, they bound to organic particles and began sinking. The process took decades. The chemicals didn't descend directly to the deep but were cycled through marine food webs, concentrated in organisms, released when those organisms died, bound to new particles, and eventually, inevitably, settled into the sediment of the deepest trenches. What's particularly troubling is that we're finding these chemicals in organisms that have never been exposed to the original source. The amphipods in the Challenger Deep weren't alive when PCBs were being manufactured and used. They've inherited a chemical legacy from industrial practices that ended before they were hatched. The deep ocean has become a repository for our mistakes, storing pollutants that will persist for generations. The health effects on Hadal organisms are unknown. POPs are known to cause reproductive problems, immune suppression, and developmental abnormalities in many species. But we don't have enough information about Hadal amphipods to know if they're experiencing similar effects. We can measure the chemicals in their tissues, but understanding the consequences requires long-term studies that are extraordinarily difficult to conduct at Hadal depths. The creatures can't be kept alive in captivity. Observation in their natural environment requires expensive expeditions. So we're left with concerning data and limited understanding of what it means. There are other contaminants too. Mercury from coal combustion and industrial processes has made its way to Hadal depths, detectable in sediment samples. Radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing in the mid-20th century are present in measurable quantities, particularly cesium and plutonium. These materials were dispersed into the atmosphere during above-ground nuclear tests, fell into the ocean with precipitation and gradually sank. They now rest in the sediment of the Challenger Deep, markers of the nuclear age. None of these contaminants exist at levels that would be immediately lethal to Hadal organisms. The concentrations are measured in parts per million or parts per billion, but their presence demonstrates the interconnectedness of Earth's systems. What we release into the air or water doesn't stay localized. It spreads, it circulates, eventually it settles. And the places where it settles, the deepest trenches where sediment accumulates and remains undisturbed, become archives of human industrial activity. The Challenger Deep is not just a biological ecosystem, it's a chemical record of our civilization's impact on the planet. And this leads us to consider what else we might find in the deep. What discoveries await in places we haven't yet explored? Despite several manned missions and numerous deployments of cameras and samplers, the Challenger Deep remains largely unexplored. The deepest point itself is not a single spot but an area extending over several miles, and most of that area has never been directly observed. The submersibles that have descended there spent a few hours each exploring a tiny fraction of the seafloor. The cameras that have been lowered took pictures of whatever happened to be within their frame when they landed, which might or might not be representative of the broader environment. We have snapshots, not a comprehensive survey. This means there are almost certainly organisms in the Challenger Deep that we haven't discovered yet, creatures that live in areas we haven't visited, or that move in ways that make them difficult to spot with cameras, or that are active at times when we haven't been observing. The snailfish that have been documented at extreme Hadal depths were discovered relatively recently, and there's no reason to believe they're the only fish species down there. There might be other fish, or squid, or octopuses adapted to the pressure in ways we haven't imagined. There might also be larger organisms than we've observed so far. The cameras have captured amphipods and small fish, but what about larger predators? In shallower parts of the ocean, there are food webs with apex predators, sharks, tuna, marine mammals. The Hadal zone is too food poor to support large predatory fish in the way shallower zones do, but there could be specialized predators that we haven't encountered yet. Perhaps animals that hunt slowly, ambushing prey in the darkness, or scavengers that are large enough to process significant carcasses when they find them. The bacterial communities in the sediment are also barely understood. We know they're there. We can culture some of them in laboratories, but we don't know the full diversity of microbial life in the Challenger Deep. Every new sample reveals new species of bacteria, organisms with unique metabolisms and genetic characteristics. Some of these bacteria might have biotechnological applications. Enzymes that function under extreme pressure could be valuable for industrial processes. Compounds produced by Hadal bacteria might have pharmaceutical potential. The deep ocean is not just a place to study for its own sake, but a source of discoveries that could have practical applications. There's also the question of what's living in the sediment itself, not on its surface. The sediment of the Challenger Deep extends down for perhaps hundreds of feet before reaching bedrock, and within this sediment there's an entire subsurface ecosystem. Bacteria living between sediment grains, archaea processing chemical compounds in ways that don't require oxygen, potentially even small multicellular organisms burrowing through the mud at depths we can't easily sample. These subsurface communities are invisible to cameras and not captured by surface sediment sampling. We would need to drill cores deep into the seafloor to study them, and that's technically challenging and expensive at Hadal depths. The geological features of the Challenger Deep also remain poorly mapped. We know the general shape of the trench, but the detailed topography is unknown. There might be caves, overhangs, small valleys within the larger depression. These features could create micro-environments with different conditions, supporting different communities. A cave in the trench wall might provide shelter from currents, allowing sediment to accumulate differently. An overhang might create an area where predators wait for prey. We won't know until we map the area thoroughly. There's also the time dimension to consider. We've only observed the Challenger Deep during brief periods, snapshots in time, but the Hadal environment might change over time, not in terms of its fundamental characteristics like pressure and temperature, but in terms of what's living there and how abundant organisms are. There might be seasonal variations, though what drives seasons at 7 miles depth is unclear. Perhaps cycles related to productivity in the surface waters thousands of feet above, influencing how much organic matter rains down to the deep. Perhaps migrations of certain species, moving between Hadal zones or up and down the trench walls. We don't know because we haven't observed long enough. What we're beginning to understand is that the Challenger Deep is not a simple environment. It's not just a flat plain of sediment with a few amphipods crawling around. It's complex, dynamic, worthy of much more study than it's received so far. Every expedition raises new questions. Every sample contains surprises. And this suggests that the deep ocean, the Hadal zone in particular, has much more to teach us about life, about Earth's geology, about the limits and possibilities of existence on this planet. And as we consider future exploration, we also need to think about preservation. The question of how to protect the Challenger Deep and other Hadal zones is complicated because we've barely studied them. How do you conserve an environment you don't fully understand? How do you assess threats when you don't know what's normal? These questions apply to many of the Earth's remote places, but they're particularly acute for the deep ocean because it's so inaccessible, and because the baseline, the undisturbed state we might want to preserve, has already been altered by pollution that reached the deep before we were even aware it was a problem. Currently, there are no specific protections for the Challenger Deep. The Mariana Trench is located in international waters beyond any nation's exclusive economic zone, which means it's governed by international maritime law and treaties. These laws prevent certain activities like dumping radioactive waste, but they don't create a protected area or restrict scientific research. Anyone with the resources and technology could theoretically explore the Challenger Deep or extract samples from it. In practice, only a handful of organizations have the capability. But that could change as deep-sea technology becomes more accessible. There have been proposals to designate the Mariana Trench as a marine protected area or a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognizing its extraordinary scientific and ecological value. Such designations would bring international attention and potentially create frameworks for managing activities there. But implementing protection in international waters is challenging. Who enforces the rules? Who monitors compliance? The ocean is vast and the Hadal zones are remote, even if regulations existed. Ensuring that they're followed would require resources and cooperation that don't currently exist. The most immediate threat to Hadal ecosystems isn't direct exploitation, but indirect impact from surface activities. The plastic and chemical pollutants we've discussed are already there, and more arrive every day as part of the slow rain of particles from above. Reducing these inputs requires changes to how we manage waste and regulate industrial chemicals globally, not just measures specific to the deep ocean. The health of Hadal zones is tied to the health of the entire ocean, which is tied to decisions made on land about manufacturing, consumption, and waste disposal. There's also the potential threat of deep-sea mining. Companies are developing technology to extract mineral resources from the deep-sea floor, targeting areas rich in polymetallic nodules, cobalt, and rare earth elements. While these mining operations are planned for abyssal plains rather than trenches, the environmental impact could extend beyond the immediate mining area. Sediment plumes created by mining equipment could drift for hundreds of miles. Noise from machinery could affect deep-sea organisms that rely on acoustic cues. The disruption could alter food webs and habitats throughout the deep ocean. If mining ever extended to Hadal depths or nearby areas, the impact on places like the Challenger Deep could be significant. Scientific research itself also poses questions about protection. Each sample collected from the Challenger Deep removes organisms and sediment from the environment. Each deployment of equipment disturbs the seafloor. These impacts are minimal compared to industrial activities, but they're real. The scientific community has debated how to balance the value of research against the need to preserve pristine environments. Some argue that Hadal zones are so vast and so poorly understood that current levels of sampling have negligible impact. Others advocate for more conservative approaches, limiting collection to what's strictly necessary, and avoiding repeated sampling of the same areas. Perhaps the most important protection for the Challenger Deep is simply awareness. The more people know about this place, the more they understand its uniqueness and its vulnerability, the more likely there will be public support for conservation measures. The footage from manned submersibles, the photographs, the scientific papers describing new species and documenting pollution, all of these contribute to a growing recognition that the deep ocean matters. It's not an empty void, it's not a wasteland. It's a functioning ecosystem that deserves consideration in how we manage human activities. Education plays a role too. When people learn that plastic thrown away on land can end up in the Challenger Deep, it might influence behaviour. When they understand that the deep ocean is connected to surface waters through complex cycles, they might think differently about what they put into rivers and oceans. The Challenger Deep can serve as a symbol. A reminder that our actions have consequences that reach farther than we often imagine. That Earth is finite, that there's no away where waste disappears without impact. And this awareness connects to broader themes about exploration and understanding, about why we're drawn to places like the Challenger Deep and what we hope to learn by going there. The question of why humans explore extreme environments has many answers, and they vary depending on who you ask and what drives them personally. But there are common threads that run through exploration of all kinds. Curiosity is one. The simple desire to know what's there, to see what no one has seen before, to answer questions that can only be answered by direct observation. James Cameron, when asked why he wanted to dive to the Challenger Deep, spoke about this curiosity, this need to see for himself what existed in the deepest darkness. It wasn't enough to look at photographs taken by unmanned cameras or to read descriptions in scientific papers. He wanted to be there, to experience it directly, to connect with that place in a way that's only possible through presence. There's also the challenge itself, the satisfaction of accomplishing something difficult and dangerous. Descending to the Challenger Deep requires technical expertise, courage, and acceptance of risk. It's not a tourist attraction. It's not something you can do casually. The achievement of reaching the bottom and returning safely is meaningful precisely because it's so difficult. For some explorers, this challenge is a significant part of the motivation. They're drawn to the edge of human capability, to testing themselves against environments that seem almost impossibly hostile. Scientific discovery is another powerful motivator. Every expedition to Hadal depths returns with new information, new species, new understanding of how life adapts to extremes, new data about geology, chemistry, and the state of the ocean. For scientists, the Challenger Deep represents an opportunity to expand human knowledge, to fill gaps in our understanding of Earth's ecosystems. Each sample collected, each hour of video footage, each measurement taken adds to the body of knowledge we're building about the planet we live on. But there's something else too, something harder to articulate but equally important. Exploring the Challenger Deep connects us to the planet in a profound way. It reminds us that Earth is not fully known, not completely mapped, not entirely understood. In an age where satellite imagery shows us the surface of every continent, where GPS can pinpoint our location to within feet, where information about almost anything is available instantly on our devices, it's easy to feel like the world has been completely explored, like there are no frontiers left. The Challenger Deep proves that's not true. There are still places on Earth that are truly remote, truly unknown, truly beyond the reach of most humans. And going to these places, or learning about them, can shift perspective. It can make us think about our position in the world differently. We live on the surface, in the thin layer of air and land and shallow water. And much of that biosphere is dark, cold, and under pressure that would crush us. The familiar world we know is exceptional, not normal, in the context of the planet as a whole. Exploring the Challenger Deep also raises philosophical questions about life and adaptation. When we see organisms thriving in conditions that seem impossibly extreme, it challenges our assumptions about what life requires. We tend to think of life as fragile, as needing specific conditions, moderate temperatures, water, nutrients, energy from sunlight. But Hadal organisms demonstrate that life is more flexible than that. It can exist without sunlight. It can tolerate extreme pressure and cold. It can survive on minimal food. This flexibility has implications not just for understanding Earth's biosphere, but for thinking about the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe. If life can exist at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, might it also exist in the subsurface oceans of Europa or Enceladus? Moons of Jupiter and Saturn where liquid water exists beneath ice, in darkness, under pressure. The deep ocean becomes a model for alien environments. A place to test ideas about where and how life might exist beyond Earth. So we go down to the Challenger Deep and other extreme depths for many reasons that interweave and reinforce each other. Curiosity, challenge, science, connection to the planet, philosophical insight. These motivations are not unique to Hadal exploration. They drive exploration of all kinds, of space, of polar regions, of caves, of mountains. They reflect something fundamental about human nature, our desire to know, to experience, to push beyond boundaries. And they ensure that places like the Challenger Deep, despite their remoteness and difficulty, will continue to draw us. The deep ocean is sometimes called Earth's last frontier, and there's truth to that characterization, though it's worth considering what we mean by frontier. The term usually implies a boundary, a place where known territory ends and the unknown begins, but it also carries connotations of opportunity, of resources to be claimed, of empty space waiting to be filled. The deep ocean fits some of these meanings, but not others. It's certainly a boundary of human exploration. We know less about the Hadal zone than we know about the surface of Mars. We've mapped the moon's surface in higher resolution than we've mapped the deepest trenches. In that sense, the deep ocean represents one of the last large-scale environments on Earth that remains poorly understood and rarely visited. But it's not empty. It's not waiting to be filled. The deep ocean has been inhabited for millions of years by organisms that are perfectly adapted to it. When we call it a frontier, we're describing our relationship to it, not its intrinsic nature. From our perspective, it's unexplored. From the perspective of a Hadal amphipod, it's home. This distinction matters because it affects how we think about our relationship to the deep. Are we discovering a new place, or are we intruding into an existing ecosystem? The language we use shapes our attitudes and our actions. The comparison to space exploration is frequent and illuminating. Like space, the deep ocean is an extreme environment that requires specialized technology to access. Like space, it challenges our understanding of what's possible and pushes the boundaries of engineering and human endurance. But unlike space, the deep ocean is part of Earth's interconnected ecosystem. What happens in the deep affects the rest of the ocean, which affects climate, which affects life on land. The deep is not separate from us in the way that Mars is separate. It's part of the same system we depend on for survival. This interconnection means that exploring the deep ocean isn't just about satisfying curiosity or achieving difficult goals. It has practical implications. Understanding deep-sea circulation helps us understand climate. Studying Hadal organisms might lead to biotechnological innovations. Monitoring pollution in the deepest trenches tells us about the global distribution of contaminants. The frontier metaphor, with its connotations of discovery for its own sake, doesn't fully capture the importance of deep ocean research. We're not exploring a distant frontier. We're exploring our own planet, learning about systems that affect our lives even if we never see them directly. There's also a question of scale. Earth's oceans cover about 70% of the planet's surface and contain 97% of its water. The Hadal zone, the deepest part, represents a tiny fraction of that volume, but trenches exist all over the world, not just in the Pacific. There are Hadal zones in the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, the Southern Ocean. Each has unique characteristics and potentially unique organisms. Fully exploring these environments would require decades of research and resources that currently don't exist. In that sense, the deep ocean will remain a frontier for the foreseeable future, not because we don't want to explore it, but because the task is so immense. Yet there's value in leaving some places less explored, less impacted by human presence. Not every frontier needs to be conquered. Not every unknown needs to be fully known. The Challenger Deep and other Hadal zones can serve a purpose simply by existing as reminders of Earth's vastness and complexity, as places that operate according to their own logic, independent of human awareness or approval. There's something humbling about knowing that 7 miles beneath the ocean's surface, life continues in darkness and pressure, utterly indifferent to our existence. It reminds us that we're not the centre of the planet's story, just one species among millions, inhabiting a particular environment that suits our needs. This humility is important as we face environmental challenges like climate change, ocean acidification, and biodiversity loss. These challenges affect shallow waters, coral reefs, coastal ecosystems where we can see the impact. But they also affect the deep ocean in ways we're only beginning to understand. Temperature changes propagate downward. Ocean chemistry changes affect organisms at all depths. The deep is not immune to what we do at the surface. If we're going to address these challenges effectively, we need to understand the entire ocean, from the sunlit surface to the Hadal depths. The frontier isn't just a place to explore. It's a place we're already affecting, whether we're aware of it or not, and understanding those effects is crucial to preserving what remains. So perhaps the deep ocean is not so much a frontier as a teacher, offering lessons about resilience, adaptation, interconnection, and the consequences of our actions. There's a persistent comparison between deep ocean exploration and space exploration, and it's more than just superficial similarity, more than just the fact that both require sophisticated technology and expose humans to hostile environments. There's a deeper parallel in how these environments challenge our understanding of life and what it requires. When we look for life elsewhere in the solar system or beyond, we're guided by what we know about life on Earth, and increasingly, what we know includes organisms from extreme environments like the Hadal zone. These organisms expand the parameter space of where we think life might exist. They show us that liquid water, even under crushing pressure and in eternal darkness, can support ecosystems. They demonstrate that life doesn't require sunlight as an energy source. that chemosynthesis is viable, that adaptation can overcome conditions we once thought incompatible with life. The moons Europa and Enceladus, which orbit Jupiter and Saturn respectively, both have subsurface oceans beneath thick ice crusts, and these oceans exist in darkness, potentially under high pressure, at temperatures near freezing. The conditions might be similar to what exists in Earth's Hadal zones. If life arose independently in these alien oceans, it might resemble, in its fundamental adaptations if not its specific form, the creatures we find in the Challenger Deep. Studying Hadal organisms teaches us what to look for, what biosignatures to seek, what chemical processes might indicate biological activity. The deep ocean becomes an analogue environment, a place we can study to inform our search for life beyond Earth. But the comparison also reveals differences that are worth contemplating. Space exploration captures public imagination in ways that ocean exploration often doesn't. Mars rovers and images from the James Webb Space Telescope generate widespread excitement. Missions to the Moon or plans for Mars colonization are front-page news. Meanwhile, expeditions to the Challenger Deep, equally challenging and scientifically valuable, receive less attention. Part of this is the visual appeal. Space offers stunning images, nebulae, galaxies, planets with rings or storms. The deep ocean offers images of darkness and sediment and pale amphipods, less immediately photogenic, though no less remarkable if you understand what you're seeing. There's also a difference in how we think about these places. Space represents the future in popular culture, the place where humanity might expand. The deep ocean represents perhaps the past or the present, a place that exists here on Earth, but doesn't figure into visions of human destiny in the same way. We don't imagine cities on the ocean floor or colonies in the Hadal zone. The environment is too hostile, the resources too scarce. So while space exploration is often framed as exploration for eventual habitation or exploitation, ocean exploration is framed purely as scientific study and conservation. Yet the ocean, and particularly the deep ocean, might be more important to our immediate future than Mars. Understanding ocean circulation, carbon sequestration in deep water, the health of marine ecosystems, all of these have direct implications for climate and food security. The ocean regulates Earth's temperature, produces much of the oxygen we breathe, absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. What happens in the ocean affects us profoundly, even if we never see it. Space is inspiring, but the ocean is essential. This isn't to argue that one is more valuable than the other. Both space and ocean exploration contribute to human knowledge in important ways, but rather to suggest that the balance of attention and resources might not reflect the balance of importance. The comparison also highlights different types of frontiers. Space is literally distant, separated from us by millions or billions of miles of vacuum. The deep ocean is distant in a different way. It's physically close, directly beneath us if we're on a ship in the right part of the Pacific, but inaccessible because of the medium we have to travel through. Both require technology to reach, but the challenges are different. In space, you're protecting humans from vacuum and radiation. In the deep ocean, you're protecting them from pressure. The engineering solutions differ, but the underlying principle is the same, creating a safe envelope of Earth-like conditions in an environment that's fundamentally hostile to human physiology. And perhaps that's the most important parallel. Both space exploration and deep ocean exploration push us to understand life's requirements and tolerances. Both expand our perspective on what's possible. Both remind us that the universe, and even our own planet, contains environments radically different from the narrow band of conditions we're adapted to, and both offer opportunities for discovery that can change how we understand our place in the cosmos, whether we're looking up at the stars or down into the deepest darkness. There's something profound about absolute darkness that's difficult to articulate, but deeply felt when you contemplate it seriously. The Challenger. Deep exists in darkness so complete that the concept of sight becomes almost meaningless. The creatures there have either abandoned vision entirely or reduced it to its most basic form, simple light detection that serves minimal purpose in an environment where light never naturally occurs. This darkness is not temporary. It's not the darkness of night that gives way to dawn. It's permanent, eternal, a fundamental characteristic of the environment that has shaped every aspect of how organisms exist there. And in this darkness, there's a kind of purity. The Hadal zone operates according to principles that are stripped of the complexity that light brings. There's no photosynthesis, no plants, no solar-driven seasonal cycles. Everything depends on the slow rain of organic matter from above or on chemosynthesis at hydrothermal vents elsewhere in the ocean. The food web is simple because it has to be. There aren't enough resources to support the elaborate trophic structures you find in sunlit waters. Life in the Challenger Deep is reduced to essentials: finding food, avoiding predators, reproducing. And even these basic activities happen slowly, stretched out over timescales that reflect the scarcity of energy in the environment. This simplicity has a certain elegance. The Hadal ecosystem is not simple because it's primitive or undeveloped, but because it's extremely efficient. Every adaptation serves a purpose. There's no room for waste when calories are scarce and energy is precious. The organisms that exist there are precisely fitted to their environment, shaped by millions of years of selection pressure into forms that maximize survival and reproduction under the harshest conditions. They are, in a sense, perfect for their niche. They couldn't exist anywhere else, but in the Challenger Deep they thrive. What this teaches us is that darkness, scarcity, pressure and cold are not inherently hostile to life. They're just conditions. And life, given time, finds ways to exist within whatever conditions are stable enough to allow it. The Hadal zone seemed inhospitable when we first learned of its existence because we were comparing it to the environments we know, the sunlit surface waters or terrestrial habitats. But it's not inhospitable to the organisms that live there. It's their home, the only place they can survive. Removing them from the deep would kill them just as surely as placing us in the deep would kill us. This perspective shift from seeing the deep as hostile to seeing it as simply different is valuable. It applies to more than just the ocean. It applies to how we think about different cultures, different ways of living, different perspectives on what constitutes a good life. What seems harsh or limiting from one perspective might be perfectly adequate or even preferred from another. The Hadal amphipod doesn't experience its life as impoverished because there's no sunlight. It has no concept of sunlight. Its sensory world is rich in ways we can barely imagine. Chemical gradients, pressure waves, tactile information from the sediment. It experiences its environment fully, just through different modalities than we use. There's also something to be said for the patience of the deep. Life there operates on geological timescales in some ways. Changes happen slowly. Evolution proceeds, but not at the rapid pace we see in environments with high reproductive rates and short generation times. A Hadal snailfish might live for decades. An individual amphipod might experience the same square metre of seafloor for its entire life. There's no rushing, no urgency, just the slow, steady continuation of existence. In our fast-paced, constantly changing world, there's something almost meditative about imagining life in the Challenger Deep. The stillness, the quiet, the long, slow arc of individual lives and species histories. And perhaps that's what the darkness ultimately teaches, that there are many ways to exist, many timescales on which life operates, many conditions under which it can flourish. That our experience of the world, vivid and rich as it is just one possible experience. That beneath the ocean, in permanent night, under pressure we can't withstand, life continues, indifferent to our knowledge of it, following its own patterns and rhythms. This doesn't diminish our lives but enriches our understanding of what life is. It expands our definition. It reminds us that the universe is larger and stranger and more diverse than our limited perspective might suggest. And this expanded perspective leads us gently and naturally to consider our relationship with these deep places and what responsibility we might have toward environments we're only beginning to understand. We are, all of us, products of Earth, shaped by its conditions, dependent on its systems, connected through countless threads to every part of the biosphere, even when we're unaware of those connections. The oxygen we breathe comes partly from the ocean. Produced by phytoplankton during photosynthesis in sunlit surface waters. The climate we experience is regulated by ocean currents that circulate heat around the planet. The rain that falls on land and fills our rivers comes from water evaporated from the ocean. We think of ourselves as terrestrial, as land-dwelling, but our lives depend on the ocean in profound ways that we rarely acknowledge in our day-to-day existence. The Challenger, deep, 7 miles beneath the surface, seems impossibly remote from our lives. What happens there doesn't affect us directly, or so we might think. But the deep ocean is part of the same system we inhabit. The carbon dioxide we emit into the atmosphere eventually dissolves into the ocean, affecting its chemistry at all depths. The plastic we discard makes its way eventually to the deepest trenches. The chemicals we manufacture find their way into Hadal sediment. We are connected to the deep, not through proximity, but through the cycling of materials and energy through Earth's systems. What we do at the surface reaches the deep, and what happens in the deep over long timescales affects the surface. This interconnection creates a kind of responsibility. We didn't create the Challenger Deep, and we can't control what happens there in most respects. But we can influence it through our actions. We can reduce the amount of plastic entering the ocean. We can regulate the chemicals we produce and release. We can approach deep-sea research and exploration with respect for the ecosystems we're studying. We can advocate for protections that preserve Hadal environments, even when we can't directly monitor or enforce those protections. These actions might seem small in the context of the deep ocean's vastness, but they matter because they reflect our values and our recognition that we share this planet with countless other organisms, including those living in conditions we'll never experience directly. There's also a question of belonging. We belong to Earth, not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense of being part of it. We evolved here. Our physiology is shaped by Earth's gravity, atmosphere, and climate. Our sensory systems are tuned to perceive the ranges of light, sound, and chemical signals present in terrestrial environments. We are fundamentally Earth organisms, and this connects us to every other Earth organism, from the bacteria in the soil to the amphipods in the Challenger Deep. We share a common ancestry, a family tree that extends back billions of years to the first life that arose on this planet. The Hadal amphipod is, in a very real sense, our distant cousin. We're made of the same basic materials: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, arranged into proteins and nucleic acids according to the same genetic code. This belonging brings a kind of humility. We're not separate from nature, not exempt from the ecological principles that govern other organisms. We're part of the system, exceptionally clever and technologically advanced perhaps, but still dependent on the same resources, subject to the same limits. The Challenger Deep reminds us of this because it exists entirely outside human influence in terms of its fundamental characteristics. We didn't create the pressure or the darkness or the cold. These conditions arise from Earth's physics and geology. They would exist whether humans existed or not. And life thrives there, adapted over vast stretches of time, demonstrating that existence doesn't require human presence or approval. As we continue to explore the deep ocean and learn more about places like the Challenger Deep, we have an opportunity to approach this knowledge with wisdom rather than just curiosity, to recognize that discovering something doesn't give us the right to exploit or destroy it, to understand that preservation is as important as exploration, to appreciate that the deep ocean, in all its darkness and pressure and mystery, has value simply by existing, regardless of whether it provides resources or economic benefits to humanity. The Challenger. Deep will continue to exist long after humans are gone. long after our civilizations have crumbled and our species has either evolved into something else or gone extinct. The trench will still be there, 7 miles down, a permanent feature of Earth's geography created by forces far more powerful than anything we can muster. And life will continue in the darkness, adapted and thriving, carrying on the ancient patterns of existence that have characterized this planet for billions of years. We're privileged to live at a time when we can visit these places, when we can learn about them, when we can wonder at their existence. And perhaps that wonder, more than any specific scientific finding, is what the Challenger Deep offers us. A reminder of how extraordinary this planet is, how diverse life can be, and how much remains for us to discover and protect. We've travelled together tonight through 7 miles of ocean, from the sunlit surface down through twilight and midnight zones, to the absolute darkness of the Challenger Deep. We've learned about pressure and adaptation, about creatures that thrive where we could not survive, about the journeys humans have made to this most remote place on Earth. We've contemplated the pollution that has reached even these depths, the discoveries waiting to be made, and the meaning of exploration and preservation. It's been a long journey, covering territory both physical and philosophical, and I'm grateful you've stayed with me through all of it. The question we began with was, what lives in the darkness? The answer, as honestly as I can give it, is this: more than we expected, and probably more than we've yet discovered. Life that is strange and beautiful, adapted to conditions that challenge everything we thought we knew about biological limits. Amphipods processing sediment in eternal darkness. Snailfish navigating by senses we can barely imagine. Bacteria metabolizing chemicals in the cold and pressure. These organisms don't just survive in the Challenger Deep, they belong there. It's their home, the only place they could exist, and they've been thriving there for millions of years before humans knew the deep ocean existed. If you enjoyed this slow drift through the deepest ocean, a like really helps others discover these calm explorations. And if you have thoughts about the Challenger Deep, about the ocean, about what we've discussed tonight, I genuinely enjoy reading them in the comments. To those who are already subscribed and return to these long documentaries night after night, thank you. Your presence here matters more than you might realise. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you're comfortable. I hope your breathing has slowed and deepened. I hope the thoughts that crowded your mind earlier have settled, becoming quieter, less urgent. I hope your body feels heavy and warm, ready for rest. The Challenger Deep is so far from where you are right now, but in a sense we're all connected to it, all part of the same planet, the same vast ocean that covers most of Earth's surface. Picture, if you will, the deep ocean tonight as you drift towards sleep. Not the crushing pressure or the absolute darkness, but the stillness, the quiet. Imagine the slow drift of marine snow falling through miles of water, organic particles settling toward the bottom like snow in a snow globe. Imagine the amphipods moving across pale sediment, navigating by senses we don't possess, living lives we can barely understand. Imagine the vastness of it all, the miles of water, the trenches stretching across the ocean floor, the life existing in conditions that seem impossible. All of it happening right now, as you rest, as you breathe, as you let yourself sink into sleep. In the end, what we've learned is this: Earth is deeper and stranger and more resilient than we often imagine. Life finds ways to exist in the most extreme places. The planet has its own rhythms and patterns that continue whether we're aware of them or not. And there's peace in that, a kind of comfort in knowing that the world is larger than our worries, that existence continues in forms and places beyond our daily experience. The Challenger. Deep will be there tomorrow and the day after, and for millions of years to come. The amphipods will process sediment, the snailfish will hunt in darkness, the slow rain of organic matter will continue to fall, life will persist, the deep will remain. Sleep well. Let your mind drift like marine snow, settling gently, finding its own depth. Dream of dark waters and strange creatures, of pressure and adaptation, of the deepest places on Earth where life continues in its own quiet way. May you rest as peacefully as the still waters of the Hadal zone, undisturbed and calm. May your thoughts be as slow and patient as the creatures that live in eternal darkness. May you wake refreshed, carrying with you some small sense of wonder at this planet we share with amphipods and snailfish and countless other forms of life, each perfectly adapted to their place, each belonging to Earth in their own way. Good night, rest well. And thank you for descending into the deep with me tonight. The surface will be there when you wake, but for now, let yourself rest in the darkness, safe and warm, breathing slowly, drifting peacefully into sleep. Good night.